Okay, welcome to this lesson. This lesson is on solving quadratic equations by factorising. Now you should already be able to factorise a quadratic expression, and if that doesn't make any sense to you and you've got no idea how to do that, then you need to go back to the previous video which will teach you how to do that. So as long as you can factorise a quadratic expression, you're in the right place to start this video. So by the end of this video, you should be able to solve a quadratic equation by factorising. So the difference between an equation and an expression is that last time we had just expressions, bits of algebra. This time we're going to have equations, so we're going to have an equal sign in them, and we're going to solve those quadratic equations. Now, before you start, what I want you to do is just think of 6 pairs of numbers, and each pair, there's only one condition on that pair of number, and that is that they've got to multiply to give the answer 0. So I'm going to think of a pair. My pair is 3 and 0. I think 3 times 0 is 0, so that's my first pair. So whilst you think of your 6 pairs, I'm going to think of my 6 pairs, and I'm going to do them off camera so you can't see mine. So think of 6 sets of pairs where the only thing that I care about is that they multiply to give the answer 0. One, two, three, four. Okay, so I've got 6. If you haven't yet got 6, then pause the video until you've got 6 and then restart. So let's have a look. I'm going to get my 6 up on the screen while you finish your 6. So here's my 6 pairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got 6 pairs. Hopefully you've got 6 pairs as well. And your 6 pairs might be completely different to mine. I'd be surprised if they were the same. But I think that all of those pairs of numbers that you've chosen, that I've chosen, have one thing in common. And I think if we look at all 6 of these, there's always a 0 in every pair that you've chosen. In this pair I've got 2 zeros, but hopefully if you've chosen numbers that multiply to give you 0, then somewhere in each pair you've got a 0, and that's quite important. We're going to use that to help us to solve these quadratic equations in a second. Okay, so put your 6 things to one side and let's get going. I have lost my lesson. We're good to go now. So today we're going to learn to solve quadratic equations by factorising. So this is an equation, this lesson. It's got an equal sign in it. Last lesson you just had an expression which looked like that, and you just had a bit of algebra and you learnt to factorise them. This time I've got an equal sign, and that's quite important because now I can solve it and find some x values that make that equation true. So the first thing I'm going to do is exactly what we did last time. I'm going to factorise this equation. So up here I'm going to make a list of everything I can think of that multiplies to give me 6. And some of you will be able to do this in your heads by now. Some of you will just be able to do this just by looking at it. Some of you still need to write all of this out. And if you do, that's fine. Write it out with me. If you don't, you can put it straight into brackets. Now notice I've just left that equals 0 there. Okay, so that needs to stay there. That's why we can solve it. And I just leave it alone on this side. Then I do what I did last time. I put an x and an x. And remember, all the pairs that multiplied to give me -6, and now I'm looking for the pair that adds up to -7. So I think that's this pair here. That makes -7 when I add them together. So I'm going to put a -1 in here and a -6 in here. So my first step always is to factorise if I can. Okay, so I've done my factorising. Next up, I need to go back to this idea that we had earlier. So earlier we said, if I've got 2 things multiplied together that give me the answer 0, then one of those 2 things must be 0, or both of them. So at the bottom here, both of them were 0, but at least one of those 2 things must be 0. So now I'm going to look at what I've got here. Here, I've got 2 brackets multiplied together, because remember, the only sign we're allowed to miss out in algebra is a multiplication sign. Okay, so this bracket times by this bracket gives me 0. So what that tells me, with the work I did at the beginning, is that either this thing or this thing must be 0, because if this times this equals 0, then one of those 2 things must be 0. So I can now use that to say, what do I know? Well, I know that either this first thing is 0, or this second thing is 0. And I don't know which, but one of those two things must be 0 because of the work we did at the beginning when we looked at when I times two things together and I get the answer 0, one of those two things must be 0. So either this is 0 or this is 0. Now this is just like a mini equation. It's a very simple one. So what I'm going to do is add 1 to both sides to get the x on its own. And that tells me that x is equal to 1. Or I said this might be true. And if this is true, then this time I'm going to add 6 to both sides. Tells me that x equals 6. So this or this are the solutions to this equation. If I put a 1 in here for x and sort it all out, then it would give me 0. Equally, if I put a 6 in here for x and sorted it all out and worked it out, I would get the answer 0. So these two things here are what are called the solutions, the answers to this equation here. Now, normally when I solve an equation, I've so far usually just got one answer, but because this has got an x squared in it, then I'm expecting two answers, so either this one or this one. And when you answer those questions in an exam, you write both of these things down on the answer line because they are both the solutions to this equation here. Okay, so we've done one, let's do another one. So this time, here's my equation. First thing I'm going to do is write down a list of all of the pairs of numbers that I can think of that multiply to give me -4. So I think -1 and 4, and 1 and -4, and 2 and -2, and that's the same as if I had -2 and 2, so I think that's everything I can think of. Next up, I need the pair that adds up to +3. So I think that's this pair here. That adds up to +3. So now I'm going to put my brackets together like I usually do. Don't forget to put the equals 0 on the end. That's really important. If you lose that, you kind of lose the sense of what you're doing. Put the x and the x. This was my pair that I'd chosen, so I'm going to put a -1 in here and a +4 in here. And now I need to remember that there's a missing multiplication sign in there, and this multiplied by this gives me 0. So that allows me to do the thing I do next, that is to say either this bracket is 0 or this bracket is 0. So then I split it off into two options. Either this one is 0 or this one is 0. And then I just do exactly what I did before. I just rearrange this equation to get the x on its own. So I add 1 to both sides. This one, I need to get rid of the +4, so I'm going to -4. And here are the two solutions to this equation here. And what that means is if you put either of those two numbers into the stuff on the left-hand side, you would get the answer 0. So when they ask me to solve this equation here, these are the two answers that I give them. Last one. Let's see if I can, oh no, the answer is no. I can't work the thing, so I'm just going to move the paper, it's easier. So same as before, all the pairs of numbers that multiply to give me -20. There's quite a lot of these, so you ready? -1 and 20, 1 and -20, -2 times 10, 2 times -10, -4 times 5, 4 times -5. And then I need the pair that adds up to, well, now I need to just think, what does this mean? Well, this, remember, means -1. It's like having 1x in there. So I need the pair that adds up to -1. So have a look down here. Which pair adds up to -1? Oh, no, that one adds up to +1. This one adds up to -1 here. So now I'm going to put it into brackets. +4 in the first bracket, -4 in the second bracket. And then we do what we did before. We say either this bracket is 0 or this bracket is 0. And then I solve those two equations. So get the x on its own. And here are my two answers, my two solutions that solve this equation here. Okay. Now I think I've got just a few special cases which might trip you up. So I'm just going to do these three examples and then you're going to go and practice some. So these three are just a little bit different to some of the ones that we've looked at so far. This one's a bit different because it's only got 2 bits to it. There's no x term in the middle. Now, the easiest way to think of this is to think of it, instead of just like this, I'm going to just think of it as having no x's in the middle here, okay, because there are no x's here, so I'm going to just insert that in there. And for those of you who are good at this and get practiced at this, you don't need to write this out, and eventually you'll just recognize these and be able to do them straight away. But if you're going to get stuck, insert this, because then we just proceed exactly like we did before. So over here I'm going to write a list of everything I can think of that multiplies to give me minus 49. So negative 1 times 49 and 1 times negative 49. And then I think 7 sevens make 49, so negative 7, and 7 is my other option. And then I'm looking for the pair that adds up to nothing, okay, which is my only option for the pair that adds up to nothing. So now I'm going to put x and x, minus 7 in this bracket, positive 7 in this bracket. Now, for some of you who get good at these, you need to just start to recognise this as a special case. And the title of this type of equation is, we call it the difference of two squares. Because this is x times x and this is 7 times 7, so you've got a square number here and a square number here, and it's a minus sign, so it's a difference. So if you get good at just recognising these, then you can straight away put the x and then the square root of 49 at the end, and remember 1 minus sign, 1 plus sign. But if remembering all of that is just too hard in your head, you can always remember just insert it's got no x's, so put that in the middle and then just do it like you normally would. Now we've factorised it, so now we're going to proceed exactly like before. So either this bit is 0 or this bit is 0. And then just sort out the equations. I'm going to minus 7 from both sides on this one to get that x on its own, minus 7. 0 minus 7 is minus 7, so that's my first answer over here. This side I'm going to add 7. And so these are my two possible answers for this equation at the top here. Next up, another special case. Now this one often catches people out because they get in all sorts of a mess with this one, because actually this is actually an easy one. This is like we did right at the beginning of the last lesson, but because people get so used to factorising this type, the normal type, then they forget about this type. But this is like we did right back at the beginning. This has just got a common factor of x, so I'm just going to take the common factor out the front and put it into one bracket. Because if you think back to the very first exercise we did on factorising in the other video, literally we just said what goes into x squared that also goes into 8x, put the x out the front, and then x times what makes x squared. Well, I think x times x, and then x times what makes 8x. I think 8, and a minus sign in the middle. Okay, so this is the easy factorising that we did early on, but we forget about those because we spend so much time doing the harder factorising. So don't let those ones catch you out. Now, how do we solve that? Well, it's the same deal because there's a times sign here, and so either this or this are equal to 0. So we just do exactly what we did before. We say either that x is equal to 0, and I don't need to do any rearranging there because I already know what x is, or x minus 8 is equal to 0. And if I add 8 to both sides, that tells me that x needs to be 8. Okay, and lastly, if they're feeling mean, they might just mess around with it and it might just look quite right. Now, all of the ones that I have solved so far have had a 0 on the right hand side. And the reason I want a 0 there is because that's what allows me to do this clever trick here of saying either this one or this one must be 0, because we know they multiply to give 0. So the first thing you do if it looks like this is you don't do anything while it looks like that, and you've got to make this a 0. So I've got to get rid of that 40, because with that 40 there, I can't solve it because I can't do that trick of this times this equals 0. So the first thing I need to do is get rid of that 40, so I'm going to take it away from both sides. So this side I had 40, taken away 40, I think I've now got nothing left. This side I had an x squared, I had a minus 3x, and now I've got a minus 40, so it now looks like this. And now it looks in the same sort of format as everything we've done so far, so I'm going to do exactly what we did before. X and X. Over here, a list of everything that multiplies to give me minus 40. That's quite a lot of things. Minus 2 and 20, 2 and minus 20, 3, 4 times minus 10, minus 4 times 10. 5 goes into 40 as well. 6, 7 don't. So, they've all gone off the page, sorry. So I think that's my whole list of things that multiply to give me 40, minus 40. And again, you as you get better at this, some of you will just be able to do this process in your head and just decide which one you want straight away. But if you need to, write it all out. And I want the pair that adds up to -3. So I'm going to go down this list until I've found the set that add up to -3. Not that one, that's 8, take away 5 is +3, so that one there is -3. So I'm going to put +5 in here, -8 in here, and then do exactly what I've been doing. Either this first one is 0, or the second one is 0. So x is either -5 or it is 8. And remember, I put both of those on my answer line. Okay, so you get a chance to stop the video now and do a whole load of practice. Now there are loads of questions on the sheet and you'll have been told which ones to have a go at, so don't try and do them all, it will take you forever. Do the ones your maths teachers told you to have a go at, stick to the timings or the questions that they've told you to do, and the answers are on the sheet as well. So when you've had a go at those, some of you are coming back for part 2, some of you will be doing something different. So pause the video now. Welcome back. If you're back, then we're going to do exactly the same idea, but we're going to do it on the harder quadratics that we practiced in the video that came before this one. So the principle is exactly the same. We're going to factorise the left-hand side, and then we're going to say these two things multiply to give me 0, and just do the same kind of thing as we did before. So these are trickier to factorise. Remember, we talked about the fact that you need to find all the things that multiply to give me +1. And all the things that multiply to give me 11x squared, so I think that's 11x and x, and then we need to play around with them sometimes to work out what goes in the bracket. So in this first bracket I'll need an 11x, and in the second bracket I'll need an x. I haven't got a choice about that because there are only one option up here. And then I just need to decide, do I need 1 and 1 or -1 and -1? And again, it won't matter which bracket I put them in because they're the same. And everything's positive, so I'm going to put a +1 here and a +1 here. So again, if you haven't practiced factorising with numbers at the front, you need to have done that video before you try and do this. Now I do the same thing as I did before. So I say either this first bracket is 0, or this second bracket is 0. And some of you will be tempted to shortcut. I suspect some of you have been just going straight from here to here when because you've done so many of them, which is okay when it looks like this, but it's quite dangerous when it's got a number at the front. So my advice would always be write the thing and rearrange it, because then you're guaranteeing you're getting it right. So over here I've got a bit more rearranging to do. First thing I'm going to get rid of is the 1, so I'm going to take away 1 from both sides. And then I need to get rid of the 11 to get the x on its own, so I'm going to divide by 11, and I'm just going to leave it as a fraction. I'm not going to worry about what decimal that is, so it's perfectly fine to leave that as a fraction. So my solution to that equation is this or this, and I write them both down on my answer line. Okay, next up, here's another one. So again, I need to factorise this, and I've got a few more options this time. So over here I could have 4 and 1 or 2 and 2, and it's a positive number, so I either need 2 plus signs or 2 minus signs when I put them into brackets. And the 9x squared, well, that could have come from 9x and x, or it could have come from 3x and 3x, and I'm frantically looking for my pencil, which I don't think I've got today. Nope, so we're just going to have a go over here until we find the pair that works, and then I'll put them in here. So let's start with the 9x and the x. Let's move it over so you can see it. And then let's try 4 and 1. And remember, this one went with that one, and this one went with this one. So this gives me 9 and 4, which is never going to make minus 12. So let's try the 1 and the 4 the other way around. Well, that gives me 36 and a 1. That's even further away, so that's not going to work. So now I'm going to try it with a 2 at the end here. That gives me a 2 and an 18. Again, not going to make a minus 12. And swapping them around doesn't do anything because they're the same number. So probably it's not that one. Let's try 3x and 3x. So 3x, 3x. Let's try 4 and 1. That makes a 12. And that makes a 3. That's not going to make a 12. So swap them around. That makes a 1. And it doesn't make any difference swapping them around because they're the same at the beginning, so I should have thought of that. So let's try with the 2 and the 2. That's my last option, so let's hope that works. So that gives me a 6, that gives me a 6, and I want it to be negative 12, so I'll put 2 minus signs in there. So I think when I factorise it, I've got this. Okay, and actually these two brackets are the same, so if I was being fancy about it, I could have written it like this, if I wanted to. Okay, either way, if I'm doing it that way, either 3x minus 2 equals 0, well this will give me 3x minus 2 equals 0 as well. So because I've got that repeated bracket, I'm actually only going to get one solution this time. So now I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and now divide by 3. And again, I'm just going to write that as a fraction. I don't see any reason why I need to turn it into a decimal unless they tell me to. So this was 2 divided by 3, so I wrote it as 2 divided by 3 and left it as a fraction. Okay, there's only one solution this time because both brackets are the same, and it's called a repeated root or a repeated solution because basically there's only one bracket and I have repeated it. Okay. And one more, let's factorise this one. So again, I haven't got my pencil, so I'm just going to do it out the side here. Options for minus 3 are 3 and 1, and I'm going to need 1 plus sign and 1 minus sign. Option for 5x squared is 5x and x and nothing else. So all I need to do is decide which way round to put in the 3 and the 1. So I'm going to try 3 and 1 this way round. And I'm aiming for negative 2. This gives me a 5. This gives me a 3. So if I wanted minus 2, I think if I put the minus sign there, because that would give me minus 5, and the positive sign here, and that would give me plus 3, I think that gives me minus 2. So I was lucky this time, first time this time. And then finish it off, either 5x plus 3 equals 0. So I'm going to minus 3 from both sides, and then divide by 5, and minus 3 divided by 5, I'm just going to write minus 3 divided by 5 as a fraction, or x minus 1 equals 0, add 1 to both sides, so x equals 1. So my two solutions to that equation are x is negative 3/5 or x equals 1. Okay, so that's the end of this lesson. Again, you've got some to practice. Please make sure you do whatever your teachers told you to do.